everybody. Welcome to Zone Defense. We talk all things NBA and NFL. Be sure to follow us on Spotify at Zone Defense Podcast, on Twitter at Zone Defense Pod, and hit the subscribe button down below because it really helps out our channel a lot. Also, let us know who's your pick to win the NFC or AFC West. Today, we will be doing our first AFC divisional breakdown with the AFC West. How's it going, Drew?
Good. I've been missed a couple episodes there because I was out of town and doing other stuff, so it's good to be back. Unfortunately, Roman's not here for this episode, but hopefully he will be back after the next one. And we do have his picks, so should be a good division to do overall. Obviously, there's one really good team, and then there's just three pretty interesting teams still too. But yeah, if you're ready to go, we can jump right into the first team here if you're ready.
Yeah, let's jump into it, man.
Okay, so we have the Los Angeles Chargers. This is the only AFC West merchandise I own, so I have this Los Angeles Chargers shirt on. I think they have the best jerseys, best uniforms in the league. But anyway, let's look at their additions. They really wanted to address the offensive line to protect this man right here, Justin Herbert. They added Corey Linsley, Rashawn Slater in the draft, as well as Asante Samuel Jr. in the draft as well, and Kyler Fackrell to help address the defense that was ravaged by injuries last season. And they also added veteran tight end Jared Cook to replace outgoing veteran tight end Hunter Henry, who signed with the Patriots. They also lost Rayshawn Jenkins, Denzel Perriman, Melvin Ingram, Trey Turner, Casey Hayward, and Forrest Lamp. So for the Chargers, I feel like it's the same story every year. They have a lot of talent on paper, but yet they always seem to get injuries. Last year, there was a lot of questionable coaching decisions by now offensive coordinator for the Lions, Anthony Lynn, who used to be the Chargers head coach. So maybe new head coach Brandon Staley will be able to kind of help with some of those coaching and time management issues that plagued this team all of last season. Because you look at that record, 7-9, it seemed like they were much better than 7-9 last season, but they just were more times than not. They lost the close games, even though they were in the playoff hunt really throughout the season. So I'm interested to see. I know you're really high on this team. I'm not going to spoil my predictions yet, but I know you're really high on this team. So, Chris, how about you start us off here? What do you think about this Chargers team? Are they going to be a playoff team, or are they going to be kind of same old story they've been for the last few seasons?
Yeah, like you said, very high on this Chargers team. I think this is a playoff team, Drew. I mean, this is a new coaching staff, which brings its own risk, but it also eliminates Anthony Lynn's absolutely piss poor clock management, which I was sick of every year for the Chargers. Chargers are a team that always, like you said, looks really nice on paper, really shiny. They're like the Lambo in a trailer park in a trailer park. That's what it kind of looks like. They got a lot of shiny toys like, Derwin James, Joey Bosa, Keenan Allen, and they just can't get the job done. But this year, I think it's a little different. I mean, like I said, new coaching staff brings new energy. They have a franchise quarterback in Justin Herbert. And I really think that offensive line is going to be extremely, extremely improved, and at least the top 12 unit. I mean, Linsley and Slater. Slater was a steal. I know he's a rookie, which doesn't make a huge difference, but a guy like Slater is going to instantly impact this offensive line. And then Linsley obviously is going to set the tone up the middle as well. I think this running game with Austin Eckler, who is one of my favorite players, and honestly, I should be wearing his jersey right now for this video. He's an absolute stud, and I think he's going to have a big season. And obviously, I mean, Herbert, there's a lot of talk about him having a sophomore slump season going on here, but I don't see it, man. I think he's going to be, the offensive line is going to be so much better, and he already had one of the best NFL seasons for a rookie in NFL history. So I really think this is a change team, and a team that is going to be definitely in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the potential sophomore slump for Justin Herbert, because that was something I was going to ask you about, if you think that's actually going to happen or not, because that is a big storyline right now. Is was it all just a myth, or was it just 1 year wonder for Justin Herbert? And I'm not as not concerned as you. It sounds like you are. It is something in the back of my mind. I mean, we even look at last year with like Lamar Jackson, for example. I mean, obviously Herbert didn't win an MVP. But he struggled there for the first half of the season, then he was able to kind of turn it on there down the stretch. So hopefully that won't happen with Herbert, but it's just with this team, and like you said, it was a perfect analogy. It's like a Lambo in a garbage park. They have all the shiny toys, but it just seems like whether it's coaching or really injuries is the big issue with this team. It seems like, I mean, it was Keenan Allen a few years ago, and then it seems like Joey Bosa, Derwin James. It seems like all their defensive pieces always get hurt every single season. It seems like, and it's just it's hard to predict those kind of things, but it's weird that it keeps happening to this team every single year. It seems like. So I think if they stay healthy, if the new Brandon Staley is the new head coach, which I didn't love the hire. I'm going to be honest with you. I definitely think they could have um, I think Eric Bieniemy was like the big name, the guy for the Chargers. I feel like he might have been a better option there, especially when you have like
That
a
would have been
young
sweet.
quarterback like Justin Herbert. I think that would have been really awesome. So I do have my question marks there too. Staley's just a very much of an unknown. But if he's able to kind of bring what he brought with the Rams defense to the Chargers, who already they have a lot of good defensive pieces as well. I mean, they could have a top 5 defense and a top 5 offense this year. It's very, very possible. And I think you had to give props to the Chargers as well, as they didn't do what the Bengals did with the Bengals with their also second-year quarterback and Joe Burrow, and they really didn't address the offensive line all that much. With Herbert and the Chargers, they addressed the offensive line a lot, like you said, and it should hopefully prove beneficial this year. But it's really going to come down to, I think, 3 things: injuries, the coaching staff being good, and then Justin Herbert hopefully avoiding the sophomore slump. But I can go and give my record prediction right now, and this is going to be. I feel like I've been sounding a lot lower on the Chargers than I actually am. I think I'm more so just playing devil's advocate because I know how hyped up you are for the Chargers. But I actually have them going 12-5 this year.
Wow.
They have an
Oh
easy
my God.
schedule. I looked at their schedule. They have like they play. I think I know they play the Texans. They play the Broncos and the Raiders twice each. As you're going to see in a second, I'm not super high on either of those teams. They played well against the Chiefs last season, and I think it's weird because I don't think, like, talent wise, I don't know if they're a 12-5 team, but they do have a relatively easier schedule because they weren't as good last year. So it's more so. I'm more so playing. I like the talent, but I also really like their schedule. I think it's going to help them get to 12-5. And I'll also read off Roman's prediction as well. He was also pretty high, slightly lower than me though. He had them at 10-7, but he also had them making the wild card, and I also have them being one of the wild card teams as well.
Yeah, and then I'm going to split the defense here, and I'll take the 11-6 record to end the season. I think they're going to be really solid, definite playoff team, definite wild card team. With honestly, and see, this might be where it's different. I know you have their record as a little bit higher than me, which I'm very surprised by that you're higher on them than I am because I love this team.
I was
I
too. I
think
mean,
this
I
team
looked
is
through
a
the schedule and it was shocking.
Yeah, they don't have a super hard schedule, but I think they'll probably. I mean, they might get off to a slow start. They play a couple tough teams at the start of the year, so maybe
Yeah.
they'll start off 3-3, 4-2, something like that. But I think overall, I think this is a dark horse Super Bowl contender. That's where I think they have more upside than like you do. That's why I'm very high on this team. I think they have if they stay relatively healthy this year, if Herbert, there's a lot of what ifs. Obviously, that's why they're a dark horse. But if Herbert is as good, if not or better this season, if they could stay healthy, if this defense is still good, they could definitely win a Super Bowl, in my opinion. Not a favorite to win, but they're a team that I could absolutely see it happen. There's always those couple teams that really shoot up the standings, in a new year, and this is one of the teams I could see doing it.
Yeah, you're right. I'm definitely. I could see it happening. I can see the roadmap, as I like to always say, for them to win a Super Bowl. It's definitely there if everything those 3 big question marks that I said earlier. If all those things kind of bounce the right way, they definitely could. But I don't know. There's a behemoth in their division that I know we're going to talk about later. You got their hat on right now, and I just don't see them getting past them unless the Chiefs have a ton of injuries. But at the same time, it's possible. It's definitely possible. But I think, even though I think their regular season might be better than you think, I think overall upside, I think you're a little bit higher on them than me. And Roman, of course, wish he was here, but I guess he's a little bit lower, but he still thinks they're gonna have a pretty good season at 10-7 and making the playoffs, which I think they did 2 years ago. I think 2 or 3 years ago. But yeah, unless you have anything else for the Chargers, we can hop into our next team. But yeah, this team I think is going to be one of like they were last year. They were a super fun team, especially after Tyrod Taylor's lung got punctured and Justin Herbert got forced into action. Which is obviously you don't want to see that happen, but it did make it for a little more entertaining football. I think they're going to be just as entertaining this year, especially with all their guys coming back fully healthy. But we'll hop in now to the Las Vegas Raiders. Um, and this is a team, it was like same old story last year as it was in 2019. They got off to a hot start. Everybody was like, oh, yeah, baby, Raiders are back. They're making the playoffs. And then they just fell off down the stretch and they finished at 8-8. It was pretty much the same exact thing. They were obviously better than the Dolphins, better than the Chargers were last year. But they had that crucial loss to the Dolphins there. I think it was week 15 or 16. It was when Fitzpatrick, I believe,
Yeah.
when he couldn't see and threw the bomb. That really kind of erased any wild card hopes that they could have had. And yeah, they had a big offseason, both in terms of additions and in subtractions. They added Yannick Ngakoue, Kenyon Drake, Casey Hayward, John Brown, Solomon Thomas, Carl Joseph, and they probably had the most scrutinized pick of the first round in Alex Leatherwood. I think they took him 17th overall, and he was a guy that many analysts had going in the second or third round. So that was a scrutinized pick, but they did need offensive line help, so maybe it could pay dividends for them down the line. And then in terms of key subtractions, they lost Nelson Aguilar, Devontae Booker, Tack McKinley, Tyrell Williams, Eric Harris, and LaMarcus Joyner. So I will say I feel like this team did get marginally better, very little. If you look at their additions, I definitely think their additions are high or better, more talented players than the guys they lost. I'm still not super high on this team just because it just seems like like I said, it's the same story every year, very similar to the Chargers, I guess, where it's that they're going to get off to a great start. There's going to be articles about how great John Gruden is as a coach, and then they're going to like just fall off a cliff. And that's really, I'm kind of just resigned to be thinking that until it doesn't happen, because like I said, it's happened the last 2 years. And I'm also a little bit worried about their receivers. Hunter Renfrow, I know he came out, I think yesterday, and was talking about how, if he can beat Jalen Ramsey, he can be the best receiver in the league, and he's talking a bunch of crap. That's great. But I don't really think Hunter Renfrow is the number one. Henry Ruggs really struggled his rookie year. They obviously added John Brown, but it sounds like he struggled in the camp to start. Brian Edwards, too, is like a dark horse fantasy option, I know, but he's pretty much an unknown as well. They have the Walrus, Darren Waller, at tight end, one of the best tight ends in the league. So I guess if you look at him as the wide receiver one, maybe it'll work. But I don't know. I look at this team, and their receivers are pretty questionable. They're very similar to the Lions receiving room, in my opinion, something that we always love to scrutinize on this show all the time. So I don't know. That's a big question mark for me. And the defense. I know they added some pieces of the defense, but it wasn't great last year. Maybe it can be better this year, but they're in a very tough division. And I don't know. I think it might be more of the same this year for the Raiders, where they're going to be a decent team, but I think ultimately they're going to miss the playoffs again. But what do you think?
Yeah, this team does not inspire me whatsoever. They're and this isn't even on our subtraction thing for some reason, but they lost their entire offensive line, man. This team is coming in with, a bunch of different pieces going. Rodney Hudson is gone. They got a lot of other guys gone on the offensive line. So this offensive line is going to be trash. And that was one of the better offensive lines in the league last year for Josh Jacobs. He's now not going to be very efficient, in my opinion. That's why and we're not talking about fantasy yet, but he's really fallen off for fantasy in people's minds. So, and I see why, because this offensive line is going to be absolute putrid. But, Derek Carr doesn't inspire me. He's fine. He's a decent quarterback, but I don't think he's a guy that can elevate this team to where they need to be with the roster they have for right now. But, two guys that I'm interested in looking at this year, and I know you said this team has a similar wide receiving core to the Lions. I won't go that far. I think the Lions are still significantly worse. But, John Brown is whatever. But the two guys that I like to talk about, Brian Edwards, who's getting a ton of camp help, like you said, has an opportunity to be something relevant this year, because he really wasn't. He was horrible last year. He had like 150 receiving yards. So he didn't do anything in his rookie year. But I'm definitely excited to see what he does in his second year. And then Henry Ruggs as well, another guy really underwhelming in his first year. Still questioning the pick of him over CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. But
Yeah,
this year, another time for him to have an opportunity to improve. And so both these second year wide receivers that didn't do much, I think, are going to be very interesting this year. But other than that, this team does not inspire me whatsoever. I think this is a team that has no chance of making the playoffs in this division. I think they're in a lot of trouble this year. Their defense stinks. I know they added some pieces, but none of these guys. Casey Hayward's fine, but he gets hurt a lot. Yannick is in my opinion, one of the most, and I was talking about this a lot with my friends yesterday, one of the most overrated players in the league. I think he's a guy
Yeah.
that is, I mean, he averages like 7, 8 sacks a season, and I feel like people think he's one of the best defensive ends in the league. I really don't think in my opinion, he's just a Walmart version of Trey Flowers, and Trey Flowers for the Lions, not anything special. So I think he's just, in that tier of he's overpaid and overhyped. So he's not a needle mover for me at all on this defense. So he's just another guy in there. So this team just really doesn't inspire me at all. I have them. I'll give you my record right now, 7-10. I don't think this team is going to be very good at all. Honestly, I could see them being even worse than this, but I'm not the Raiders. I don't really know what they're doing, man. John Gruden, you gotta figure things out, man, or you gotta get out of town because this, mediocre team, mediocre roster construction. I mean, I know that's not all on you, but I know you got power on that. This is just not cutting it, man. It's not.
Yeah, and unfortunately, maybe for Raiders fans, I think I think he's halfway through his contract. I think this might be the fifth
Not
year, but
even.
it might even be the fourth year. I don't know, but he's
Yeah.
about halfway through that 10-year contract he signed a few seasons ago. So if things keep trending this direction, it's not going to be great. I do know there has been some hype. I mean, if you're looking for, again, I'm also pretty low on them, and actually, Chris, we all actually have them the same record, including Roman. We all have them at 7-10. So not a completely awful team, but a pretty not a good team. They're not making the playoffs for sure. But if you want to give Raiders fans some hope for 2022, I do believe there is some hype around possibly getting Devontae Adams to the Raiders, especially if Aaron Rodgers ends up leaving Green Bay. And then because Derek Carr, if they keep Derek Carr as their quarterback, Devontae and him had a connection in college. They're, I guess, very, very close still to this day. So maybe they get Devontae. Maybe he's their receiver one, but then that still doesn't really help their defense at all. So I don't know. I think they're going to be an interesting team. Like they were last year. I think they're going to be a tough out because I think Derek Carr is a very solid quarterback. He's very underrated in my opinion, but Henry Ruggs and to a lesser extent Brian Edwards really need to step up this year, and Darren Waller needs to be just as good as he was last year. And the defense, I mean, there's a lot of ifs, right? I think there's a chance they maybe sneak into the 7th seed, but it's very, very slim. They need all those things to bounce right. They need the offense to work. They need the defense to be not as putrid as it was last year. They need their completely revamped offensive line to not be awful. But like you said, that was a strength for them last year, and it's probably going to be a weakness for them this year. So just a lot of question marks. It's probably going to be another really tough year for Raiders fans, which really sucks because this will be the first year in Vegas that they'll hopefully have fans in that brand new stadium, and it sucks they won't have a great football team to cheer for. And I also want to mention real quick too. You mentioned Henry Ruggs, how he went ahead of CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. Another guy too, Justin Jefferson, he went ahead of, which is it's tough to see if you're a Raiders fan, I would say, even though he was definitely lower on draft boards headed into that draft than guys than even Ruggs. So, but yeah, Raiders, we all have them at 7-10, so we're not super high on the Vegas Raiders this year. But I'll hop in now to the Denver Broncos. This seemed like the team that was talked about the most. Because one of the teams that were talked about the most in the offseason because of the Aaron Rodgers rumors. It seemed like almost a done deal that Aaron Rodgers would be donning the navy blue and orange for Denver this season, but it never happened. We kept waiting for it to happen, and it never happened. And now this team is stuck with a two-headed monster of Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock at quarterback, which I don't think Denver fans are probably too excited about. But in terms of additions, they got Pat Surtain in the first round. I believe that was 10th overall. I think that was a little surprising pick because their defense was already really good, and they also added other cornerbacks in Ronald Darby and Kyle Fuller. I didn't love that Surtain pick, but he is a very talented player. They also added Javonte Williams, which I think could be a sneaky good pick there in the second round of the draft. And then they signed Shamar Stephen, Cameron Fleming, and then they traded for Teddy Bridgewater, as I mentioned a second ago. And then in terms of key subtractions, they did lose A.J. Bouye to the Carolina Panthers. He was a very solid cornerback, but I feel like they addressed the cornerback position and did more, even though they lost Bouye. They also lost Jeremiah Atauchu, Jawan James, and Philip Lindsay. So not a whole lot of subtractions. They did have a lot of additions, but something that's concerning for me is that a lot of those additions were on the defensive side of the ball, and this was a pretty solid defense, I think. I guess another possible addition you could look at is the additions of Cortland Sutton and Noah Fant. They both struggled with injuries all of last season. Sutton missed, I believe, the entire year last year. So both those guys should be back and fully healthy. So those could be some offensive additions you look at. But for me, the talent is there. I feel like for this team to be relevant, for this team to be successful. But the quarterback position leaves a lot to be desired, I feel like, and I think that's ultimately going to prevent this team from really doing anything, especially in this division where I think they're probably the fourth team in this division, is what I would say. But Chris, what do you think about the Broncos?
Yeah, the Broncos are a team that I like. I like this Broncos team. I think they're going to be a good team this year. They really, really upgraded, in my opinion, like you said, from AJ Boye to getting Surtain and Kyle Fuller. Fuller is one of the most underrated signings in the offseason coming from Chicago. I think he's a really good corner, man. I think he's at least a top 15 corner, but he's a guy that really gets disrespected in my mind, and I think he's gonna prove that this year. Him and Surtain, and honestly, even Darby, who's a decent corner, they're gonna form a pretty good trio to replace some of the guys they've lost, which Chris Harris was gone after last year, and then Boye this year, obviously. So I like what they did there. I really like having Javonte Williams in the second round. I think that was a steal of a pick. I think he's going to be really good for this team. You know, they have Melvin Gordon, so him and Javonte Williams will probably form a pretty decent 1-2 punch. So I'm excited to watch that. Also, they're also getting Cortland Sutton back, which I think that's a big deal as well for whoever starts between Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. I think that's huge for them as well. And they're also getting Von Miller back. So you look at the key additions, there's a couple guys that's not even on there. Like I said, Sutton and Von Miller that are massive additions back on the team this year after season-ending injuries really early in the last year. So I just really like what they're doing. I think the key, if they had a quarterback, this would be honestly we'd be talking about them how we talk about the Chargers, in my opinion, a
Yeah,
team that
I
could
agree.
absolutely be, the second team in this division, potential dark horse Super Bowl contender. If they had Watson, honestly, I think they could compete for the division. But obviously that's not going to happen right now. I'm just I do really like this team, though. I think this team has an outside shot, not even an outside shot. I think they got a shot at the wild card. I really do. I got them down at 9-8. I think it's a good team. I know you said maybe you're not as high on this team. I'm curious to see where you have the record at. But I think if they just had a quarterback, man, which Drew Lock, Teddy Bridgewater, both just not great options. Then if they had a quarterback, I think I'd have them up 11, 12 wins. But I can't go that far. But I think this team is very interesting for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there for pretty much everything you said. If they had a quarterback, this team, I think we'd talk about them as a dark horse Super Bowl contender. And even if you look at a year ago, I remember I had the Broncos making the playoffs last season during our preseason rankings. I think I had them at 10-6 or 11-5, and they ended up going 5-11 and missed the playoffs. And a lot of that I thought was dependent on Drew Lock. I mean, he looked really good there the final half or the final few games of 2019. It seemed like he would be able to carry that into 2020, and he just didn't. And I mean, it's something that I always fall victim to every single offseason, but I love like the quarterbacks that have an edge. As I mentioned in our NFC South episode, I really love Sam Darnold this year. I think he's going to be really good because he listened to the media, all that crap, and now he's coming out and have a good year. And I think Drew Lock, I mean, you see some of the comments for him. I think he's motivated. I think he's got a huge chip on his shoulder now because of all the negativity that his play, quite frankly, brought on himself last season. I think he could have a solid year, and they really don't need him to be like Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson or an MVP or anything like that. They just need him to be solid. They need him to be a solid quarterback because I do think he's the answer. I think if Teddy Bridgewater is your starting quarterback, I think that's when you're going to run into issues, in my opinion. It's. I mean, I know some people love Teddy Two Gloves, and that's great, but he checks down all the time. We saw it last year with Carolina. I don't know. I don't believe in Teddy Bridgewater. Maybe he'll prove me wrong. I mean, we saw New Orleans a few years ago. He was decent. He led Minnesota to the playoffs years ago. But I don't know. I feel like if this team's going to be successful, it's going to come down with Drew Lock. If he's your starter, if he's just a solid quarterback, even if he could be like a Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins level quarterback, I think this team could go pretty far because, as you mentioned, they got really good defense. They got Bradley Chubb. We haven't even mentioned him. He's a really good there on the defensive line. We mentioned they improved the cornerback position. They just have a really solid defense, and then their offense is getting new pieces. I think Jerry Jeudy is going to have a really, really awesome second year. He seems to have a nice connection there with Drew Lock. Cortland Sutton and Drew Lock also seem to have a good connection as well, going back to 2019. Noah Fant's a really good tight end. I think it's really just going to come down to, I think, Drew Lock, and he has to be successful, I think, for this team to be successful. And that's how it is for most teams, I think. If your quarterback's good, your team's good, because the talent is there. It's just the big question mark is Drew Lock. But I know I said a lot there because I think this team is very, very interesting. And I actually lied. I thought I had them as my last place team. I actually have them as the third place team, one spot ahead of the Las Vegas Raiders. I have them as at 8-9. So I think their defense, their offensive pieces will be enough to carry them to 8-9. But I think if Drew Lock and possibly Teddy Bridgewater, if they're good, then they can give them to 10 or 11 wins.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I have them just one game behind you. So I'm not as low on them. But I think you might be. Actually, no, I think we're pretty much in the same boat. I think for the most part.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is a team. They really do. They honestly, their roster isn't that much different than the Chargers, just outside of the quarterback position. Right?
Yeah.
They have a good receiving core. Their offensive line's defense. Their defense has some nice pieces on it. Obviously, if they deal with some injuries, they're not super deep, so that could be an issue for them. But you can say that about pretty much any team. But yeah, it's totally up to Drew Lock, Teddy Bridgewater to see if they can get the job done. And I'm not totally buying into either one of them, but I think both of them combined maybe can get this team to 9 wins. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say I might like this quarterback room slightly more than the Saints, which is another like two quarterback tandem with Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston. I might like Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater a little bit more, but I think it's pretty comparable there. But that's another team though. Similar, they're very similar to the Saints too, I think, in that respect, where they figure out their quarterback position, the talent's there in the other spots to be successful. But I will say though, Roman, I wish he was here because he could offer maybe some differing opinions because he's a lot lower on this team. He's got them at 6-11. So he's got them dead last in the division. I could definitely see that happening. If I know they had some injuries last year, as we already mentioned, if guys go down, if Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater are really bad, then they could have a very similar record to to the one that they did last year, which I can see that happening for sure. But I don't know. I just feel like as long as they stay healthy, I feel like the talent is, especially on the defensive side of the ball, is just too much for them to lose that many games. But we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I think it's gonna be a fun team to watch. I think it really is, and I do think they're gonna get some wins against even the Chargers, as well as the Raiders for sure. I think they're a better team. They're definitely a more talented team than the Raiders, in my opinion. But now we'll go hop in now to the final team of the division, the greatest team, probably the last few years, the best team in the league right now, the best team. They're the best team in this division. They're the best team in general. I mean, they're the Kansas City Chiefs. We're probably not going to spend too much time with them, just because everyone knows already how good they are, and somehow they got better. The offensive line, as you can see in this picture with Patrick Mahomes, from the Super Bowl, where the Buccaneers just tore that offensive line apart. They needed to address that offensive line, and they did just that. They added Joe Thuney, Orlando Brown, Kyle Long, to hopefully bolster up that offensive line. They also added Jaron Reed, Will Parks to the defense, and Jerick McKinnon and Austin Blythe as well. In terms of key subtractions, not a whole lot here. Eric Fisher, he was really the injury that basically cost them the Super Bowl. I feel like when he went down, that offensive line really suffered. They lost him to the Colts. They lost Sammy Watkins, who I think is very overrated, so I don't think that's a huge subtraction. Bashaud Breeland, and then also Damian Williams to the Bears, and he opted out last season anyway, so that really wasn't a huge subtraction. But again, I mean, this is the best team in football. This is the best team in this division. I don't really have too much to add. Patrick Mahomes is awesome. Tyreek Hill's awesome. Travis Kelce's awesome. Their offensive line is now awesome. I mean, their defense isn't great. But I think it's good enough to. I mean, we've said this every year. The defense isn't great, but it's good enough to have them be successful and still be the best team in the league. So I do think the Chargers are going to really give them a run for their money. And as we already mentioned, with the Broncos, if their quarterback position's addressed, this could be a lot more of an intense division than maybe we think. And they do have a relatively tough schedule. I think they play the Ravens, they play the Bills. I already said they play the Chargers twice. They're going to be a solid team. So I still have them as with a high record. But yeah, that's something to look out for as well. But yeah, I don't have too much to add. Do you have any analysis, any maybe big question marks with this Chiefs team? Because we already know how good they can be. They've made the Super Bowl 2 years in a row, won one of them. Should have made it 3 years ago too. I mean, they're hard to stop here. I feel like the Chiefs.
My only question is, can this team go 17-0? Because I think they're an absolutely unbelievable team. I think they're going to win the Super Bowl this year. This is they addressed really their only major need, which was the offensive line was trash in the playoffs last year, but they have absolutely addressed that. Kyle Long coming out of retirement was big. He's a good player. Joe Thuney, another really good player. Orlando Brown, a very underrated tackle. I think these three are going to boost their offensive line. They really didn't even lose that much, just losing Eric Fisher, and they can replace him with Orlando Brown. So I mean, I don't know how this team continues to get better, and I don't know how.
Yeah.
I just don't understand it. I feel like they have an unlimited amount of money, but they just play the salary cap really well. I mean, they get Kyle Long for a cheap contract. Orlando Brown's still not making a ton of money. And this is how they acquire really good talent for a little bit less. But like you said about the defense, I think the Chiefs' defense is one of the most underrated in the league. I mean, they're not. This is not a team that is going to absolutely shut you down on defense. But I always find when the Chiefs defense is in a, playoff atmosphere in a big game during regular season, they answer the bell, man. I don't know what it is about this defense. Like I said, not the most talented defense on earth. They're not some spectacular group that's, going to shut you down every week. But for some reason, man, when you need them to answer roll with the punches, they're a team that absolutely they can get stops when they need to. They can get pressure on the quarterback. They got guys like Honey Badger, big, Tyrann Mathieu is a guy that makes big plays for them. I like that Chiefs defense a lot. I think they're, like I said, an extremely underrated group. Not like I said, not a ton of individual talent, but I think they play extremely hard and extremely well together. So that's, I think the Chiefs defense is honestly in the top half of the league somehow, with this offense being the best in the league. It doesn't make any sense to me, man. But I wish there was more to talk about with this team and there was more concerns, but I don't have any. I really don't. I mean, like I said, like we're saying, the defense, yeah, they're not elite, but they're way above what they need to be for this team to be a Super Bowl contender. I mean, they could be a bottom 5 defense, and I think this team would still absolutely win, 13, 14 games. But I got them down at 50-2, man. I think they're losing 2 games all year. They got a tough schedule. I don't give a flying crap what their schedule is. I think this is the best team in football, and they're going to prove it this year. It's going to be tough, man. They're awesome.
Yeah, I mean the big thing that the reason they lost games the last couple of years is because of injuries. I mean, Mahomes was hurt there a little bit. I think that's going to be the big concern. I mean, that's what we're getting to here, right? If the team is so good, that's really going to come down to injuries. If anyone's going to attack this team, I even think a guy we haven't even mentioned yet, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think he's going to have a bounce back season too, and he wasn't even that bad last year. I mean, I know for fantasy purposes, everyone hates him right now because we all spent really high draft picks on him, and he wasn't worth those high draft picks, but. He was still solid last year. I think he's going to have a solid, a better sophomore season this year. So I mean, they don't really have any weaknesses. The defense is really the only thing. But like you said, they're underrated and they're league average, and it's just because they have a prolific offense. That I think the defense gets some knocks there, but. Yeah, and I even think Mahomes will be healthier this year because his offensive line has improved. So he's hopefully not going to be taking as many hard hits, even though he loves to scramble a little bit too. But yeah, I mean they have arguably the best quarterback, the best receiver, and the best tight end, and one of the best young running backs in the league, all on the same team. I mean, it's really insane. And I think Roman and I, if I remember correctly, talked about in our NFC South episode how we might see a Super Bowl rematch between the Bucks and the Chiefs. And I think it's very possible. I think the Bucks, at the moment, I think are still the best team in the NFC, and I think the Chiefs are still the best team in the AFC. I will say though, the one concern I would say with the Chiefs is they do have more competition in the AFC. Maybe not in their division, but I think the Bills are going to be really good this year. Once again, the NFC North is still going to be good with the Ravens and the Browns, I think. And the AFC South is the AFC South. Nothing too scary there. But I will say I think those teams could give the Chiefs some scares there in the playoffs, especially the Bills. I think the Bills might be their biggest competition. But yeah, I'm not too worried about these Chiefs. I am a little lower on them just because of the schedule. I think they are going to get a few losses in there. I have them going 14-3, so I only have them going one game less than you. And I think Roman also has them at 15-2. So I'm one game behind both you guys, but we're all obviously still very high on the Chiefs because we watch football. And if you watch football, you know the Chiefs are really good. So yeah, anything else about this team before we hop into our overall standing predictions and then fantasy?
No, I got nothing to add interesting here, Drew. I just think this team
Okay.
is going to be unbelievable.
Okay, how about you run through your standing predictions then, real quick?
Yeah, so I have the Chiefs clearly first, 15-2. The Chargers second place team at 11-6. The Broncos at 9-8, and then the Raiders I had at 7-10. So, like I said again, Chiefs, Chargers, Broncos, Raiders would be my final standings.
Yeah, so you and I, we have the same order, just slightly different records. I have the Chiefs 14-3, Chargers 12-5, Broncos 8-9, and the Raiders at 7-10. Roman has, I think, a slightly different order, but in slightly different records as well. He's got the Chiefs in first at 15-2, the Chargers in second at 10-7, the Raiders in third at 7-10, and then the Broncos in the last at 6-11. So we're all kind of in the same ballpark. I think the biggest difference was just the Broncos. You and I are a little higher on the Broncos, and Roman's much lower on them. So, but yeah, let's do before we get out of here today. Let's do the fantasy favorites of this division. I'll let you start us off here.
Yeah, Drew, I saved, my opinions on this guy when you talked about the Chiefs until right now because I wanted to talk about him here. It's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think he is a running back that you can really count on this year for fantasy. Really disappointed me and other people last year. We both had him really high in our running back rankings, but I think this year with the offensive line improving, with them having a little more trust in him, Lev Bell's gone, Damian Williams is gone. Don't have to worry about those guys. It's just him and Darrell Williams pretty much. So I think he's going to get some more work this year in the passing game, and he's going to score definitely more touchdowns because he had some bad touchdown luck last year with the amount of touches he had. And honestly, he wasn't even bad last year until he went out with the injury. He was still, a borderline top 10 running back. He was maybe the RB12 before he went out. Ended up at the RB22, and then I thought he looked really good in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Super Bowl game. I know the team played bad, but I thought he looked really good in that game. He looked like he had some explosiveness. He was still coming back from an injury too, which was a high ankle sprain, not an easy injury to overcome by any stretch. I think this is the year for Clyde. I think he's going to be a borderline RB1 this year, and you can get him in the third round, which is really the key. If he was still, that 1-2 turn pick like he was last year, I wouldn't be in on him. But the fact that you can get him all the way in the third round, I think is absolutely ridiculous. And I think that is, a huge boost for fantasy this year. And I think he's a guy you can get as your RB2, RB3, or even, as an RB1, if you go, wide receiver, you were to go like Kelsey and Devontae Adams, getting him as your number one running back would be awesome too in that sense. So I think Clyde fits a lot of molds you could have. You could load up on RBs, get him as your RB3 and feel good about his upside. You could get him as your RB2 and feel solid about that. Or he even has the upside to be an RB1 this year, like last year. So I'm very in on Clyde this year. I love the draft price, and he's one of my favorite third round picks this year.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned him. He was one of my honorable mentions because for all the reasons you just mentioned. I mean, I feel like because he was the first round pick last year, because he was a first round pick in the real NFL draft, and he was the first round pick in fantasy drafts. We all were super hyped on him, and because he wasn't a first round level running back, I think everyone's just clouded by that judgment. I know especially Roman because he was really upset with Clyde last year, but he had a solid year. I think if we would have all tempered our expectations, if he would have went in the second or third round, I think people have been very happy with what they got out of Clyde. But I think everyone's still just kind of clouded by that bad experience from last year with him being a high draft pick. And I think the second or third round draft price is awesome. If you can have Clyde as your RB2, in some cases maybe even your RB3, I mean, I think that means you have a really, really solid fantasy team there. I love the draft price. I love the player. I do think he has RB1 upside too. I think he could be. If you take him in the second or third round, you could potentially have two RB1s on your team, which I think would be really, really awesome. Because, like you said, the competition isn't there either, like it was last season. So, yeah, love that pick. I'll do Roman's fantasy pick now. He has Mike Williams. I'm going to be honest, and maybe this might be a spoiler for my pick. I'm not as high on Mike Williams. I do think he could have a very big year, but it just seems like he's very touchdown dependent. But he's pretty low there on the draft. You can get him with one of your last picks. And just have him on your bench. I think that's a very nice bench piece to have, and you can spot start him because there definitely is upside there, especially with another year with Justin Herbert and a full training camp. I think if they have that connection, he could be good. But it just seems like he's very boomer bust. It seems like with Mike Williams. That's why I don't love the pick, but still, I think if you can take him there late in your fantasy drafts, I think it's okay. It's worth the flyer for sure because Mike Williams could be a very solid receiver.
Yeah, in my opinion, I kind of like this pick from Roman. You know, he's not a guy that you have to invest a lot of draft price in, and he also is injured right now, so that maybe takes him down a little bit for me. But like, let's discount the injury right now. Let's just say he's not injured. You know, I like Mike Williams this year. I think he has some upside for sure, and he's going so late in the draft where you're not really giving up much to get him. So I definitely like. You know, he's a double-digit pick. So I mean, I definitely like taking a flyer on him, seeing if he can stay healthy. Because if he does, I mean, he's got plenty of touchdown upside in this offense, and his rookie year he had 10 touchdowns with Phillip Rivers, and since then he shows flashes all the time. I think he's a way better NFL receiver than he has been fantasy the last couple of years. He's a guy that comes down
Yeah.
with a lot of contested catches, but he hasn't had the touchdowns like he usually does. He usually gets these 40-yard bombs, but he has no ability to run after the catch because he's always flying 50 feet in the air, crashing against the ground, injuring his shoulder coming out for the game. I feel like a common stat line's like 2 for 60 and then he's injured. But if he can figure out how to take care of his body a little better, if he can, stay healthy for longer, I think he really has a chance. As the wide receiver too, in an offense that I really like, I do definitely like this pick. He's not a guy that I want as my staple in any. I'm not starting him in week 1 or anything, but I like him coming off the bench for sure. I think he's got some upside.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. As long as he's not like you're not starting him in the flex, or he's not your wide receiver too. I mean, I don't know how that would happen. I think it's okay. It's a good pick. Not too much risk there. If you because like you said, you can take him with a very very low pick. For my fantasy pick, I'm going a little off the board here. This is a guy we haven't mentioned at all. I am sticking in that Chargers receiving core, and shout out to Jordan as well because this is one of his boys as well, and that's Josh Palmer. Okay, I know a lot of people might be listening; they might not even know who Josh Palmer is, but he's a rookie. He's coming in here, and he's currently their wide receiver 3. But as you mentioned, Mike Williams is already down with an injury. Keenan Allen, I know he's getting up there in age. He's been healthy the last few seasons, but he has had injury issues in the past. Josh Palmer also had brutal quarterback play when he was in college. So I think if he's I even think if people stay healthy, I think he could still be very relevant. And this is a guy that he's literally like I think he's owned like 4% of ESPN fantasy leagues. Like you can just literally add him. You don't even have to draft him. He's available in your league right now. And I think the upside is definitely there because if you look at his talent wise, his measurables, they're very, very impressive. It's just he didn't have great quarterback play in college. I think he would have been a higher pick had he had that stronger quarterback play when he was in college. So this is a guy. He's virtually. I mean, like I said, no one's drafting him. You can literally just take a flyer on this guy, and I think he could really prove dividends for your fantasy team, especially if you're in a dynasty league as well. Definitely pick him up. I think the value is definitely there because I think he can establish a connection with Justin Herbert because he's a very talented quarterback, as we've already said. I think Palmer could be a really, really awesome dark horse sleeper for your league. So that's why I did just drop him, full disclosure, in our league. But I do like him overall. If you want to take a flyer and you want to take a risk on a guy, especially like I said, especially in dynasty, I think he's a must-add guy.
Yeah, no, I was definitely I don't really care much about him in redraft. I think he's their wide receiver 3 at best. I mean, there was some like Tyron Johnson, Jalen Guyton showed flashes last year. So I mean, he's probably going to fit that role where he has a couple nice plays. Maybe you think you could start him at some point, and I don't think that's going to be the case unless Keenan Allen or Mike Williams go down with injury. But what I do want to talk about is also his dynasty value because you look at Keenan Allen's definitely getting up there in age. I know he's under contract for a few more years, but you never know. It could come the end could come quicker than we think for Keenan. So, and Mike Williams' contract is almost up. I mean, I don't expect them to re-sign him. I mean, I feel like he's going to ask for a lot of money in free agency, and I don't think they're going to give it to him. I can't remember if he was a first rounder or not, and he has a first year option. I believe he might have been, but I think he's
he
in the
was.
fourth. I think he might be in the 4th or 5th year of his contract. So that's coming to an end shortly. Palmer has an opportunity here to climb up the depth chart very quickly, and he also has the opportunity to do that with this play on the field this year. So in dynasty, he's absolutely a must roster guy. If you're in a dynasty rookie draft, I would be absolutely taking him, in the late 3rd round, maybe even mid 3rd round, reaching on him a little bit because I think he's a 3rd round pick and he's been a guy kind of left for dead in rookie draft where, you're taking Kenny Gainwell, you're taking these other, Elijah Mitchell, these other running backs that went super late in the draft, way later than Palmer went in the rookie draft or in the actual NFL draft that are going way ahead of him. So I think Palmer is a guy that's been slept on for sure. I also very much like his college profile, his athletic profile. I think he's a guy that foots the bill for a guy that could be a fantasy contributor down the line. But for redraft, I mean, you can roster him if you want at the end of your draft and see what happens. But until Mike Williams or Keenan Allen go down with injury, I would leave him on the waiver wire.
I I think there's a way that he could dethrone Mike Williams as their wide receiver too in LA. I think even if Mike Williams stays healthy, and maybe that's because I'm lower on him than you and Roman are, but I think that's a possibility, especially because Palmer, by all accounts, has looked really good in camp too. So, and also to answer your question from earlier, Mike Williams was the 7th overall pick in the 2017 draft. So he
Wow.
was super high. I didn't realize he was that high, and that's just based on Google, so that might be incorrect. But
No,
yeah,
that's
I guess he was
definitely.
the
Jeez.
7th overall pick, so that's insane. So yeah, I don't think they're going to pay him, and I don't think they should pay him. I mean, especially if you got an awesome guy like Josh Palmer there waiting in the wings, because I do think, like I said, if he had stronger quarterback play when he was in college, I think he would be a first round pick, at worst second round pick. But because the talent's there, but because he had such brutal quarterback play, it impacted his stats, and that's why teams passed on him much more. So but yeah, I did want to mention just a couple of guys that we kind of mentioned during when we talked about the teams, but I think they're also very fantasy relevant as well. Josh Jacobs, I know he's not going to have as good of a year this year as he did last year because the offensive line is worse, and they added Kenyon Drake, but he's going like later than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and if you can have him as your RB3, RB4, I love that draft price. I definitely think he's worth a draft pick there. Cortland Sutton too, coming off the injury, he could be a wide receiver 1, and he's going super late. You can draft him as your wide receiver 3. Similarly to Jerry Jeudy, I think he's also going to have a monster year as well. And you can take him as your wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and redraft, and he could still be a wide receiver 2, maybe wide receiver 1, especially if Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater pops off there for Denver. So I like those 3 guys as well. I wanted to quickly mention them. They're slightly more established guys than a guy like Josh Palmer. But did you have anything else you wanted to talk about in terms of fantasy or this division as a whole before we wrap this episode up?
Not really, Drew. I think this is a very good division. It's gonna be very entertaining to watch this year, and always love that 4:25 time slot, which is where these teams majority of the time will play. So I always like watching these teams, in the afternoon after my fantasy team sucks in the 1 o'clock hour. So very excited for that this season. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I feel like even the Raiders, which I think is the team that at least you and I are the lowest on, I still think there's some intriguing, entertaining storylines and players for them as well. So all 4 of these teams should provide some very fun football throughout the season in that 4:25 time slot, like you mentioned. But once again, we are the Zone Defense Podcast. We have plenty of NFL offseason content still to go. We have, I think, 3 divisions left. Plus, we're going to do some fantasy episodes. I know you have a really interesting fantasy series you're hopefully going to start here very, very soon. So be on the lookout for all of that. And make sure you subscribe, comment down below, and make sure you don't miss anything. We're also on Apple Podcasts, so make sure you search us on there, as well as follow us on Spotify and Twitter at Zone Defense Pod. And also leave a comment down below. Let us know your thoughts on any of the fantasy players we discussed, any of the teams we discussed. Let us know your standings predictions. We love reading all those comments and trying to respond to them as quickly as we can. But thank you for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.